I'm 33 now. I've always been the quiet type. Not shy, exactly, just someone who listens more than he talks. I've got a job I like, not love. A small apartment, no spouse or kids. My life's been unremarkable by most standards, and honestly, I was okay with that. I grew up in a pretty standard family. My dad was a plumber who eventually opened his own small contracting company. My mom stayed home when I was young, then went into bookkeeping. We were never rich, but we never struggled either. They were the kind of parents who never missed a school play, but also never asked much about my dreams. Supportive, but not deeply involved. I was the kid who didn't cause trouble, so I guess I just slipped under the radar most of the time. My grandfather, my dad's dad, was probably the one I felt closest to. His name was Arthur, but I always called him Pops. He was quiet like me. He ran a small auto parts shop for almost 40 years, tucked into a gritty little industrial strip just off Main Street. I spent a lot of summers there, stacking boxes, learning how inventory worked, pretending I knew what half the parts even did. Pops would let me sit on the counter and drink root beer while he talked to customers. He wasn't a flashy man. Lived in the same house for 50 years, drove a pickup that rattled like a skeleton in a metal drum, wore the same type of flannel shirts year-round. But he was smart, thoughtful, and he always treated me like an adult, even when I was 12 and still couldn't carry a full crate. When Pops passed away, I was 27. I remember the call. It was a heart attack. Sudden. Peaceful, they said. I was at work when my mom told me. I just sat at my desk afterward, numb. I don't think I cried right away. That came later, in waves. The funeral was small, dignified. A few of his old friends from the business came by, guys with grease under their fingernails and thick accents who shook my hand and said, "He loved you, you know." Afterward, I asked about the shop. I didn't mean it in a greedy way, it was just his. A place full of memories. I wanted to know what would happen to it. But my dad just shook his head. Said, he didn't leave much. Place was in debt. We sold it off, paid what we could. He didn't have a will. No will? I asked, surprised. Pops wasn't careless. Dad shrugged. We looked everywhere. Might have meant to write one, but you know how he was. Never liked paperwork. I didn't argue. I wanted to, but what could I say? I was just the grandson. Not even part of the business. My parents handled everything. The house was sold. The shop was closed. Inventory cleared out. I got a few boxes of keepsakes, some tools, a pocket knife, a pair of his old glasses. I cried when I opened the box. It smelled like his garage. I kept it sealed after that. Time moved on. I mourned him quietly, the way I do everything. My parents talked about him less and less, as if closing up the business had closed that chapter entirely. And that's how it stayed. For years. Until 6 months ago. I was grabbing coffee after work when I ran into Sarah, an old classmate I hadn't seen since high school. She'd always been smart, top of the class type. We chatted, caught up. Turns out she became an estate lawyer, working for a small firm nearby. I laughed and said something like, "Guess you'd be the person to call if someone left me a surprise inheritance." She smiled and said, "Didn't your grandfather leave you something? Arthur, right? I remember handling paperwork for his estate." I froze. "What do you mean?" Sarah tilted her head. "Arthur, last name. The guy with the auto parts place? He left a direct bequest. I remember it because it wasn't through his son. It was written specifically to a grandson. You." My mouth went dry. "No, my parents said he didn't have a will." She looked genuinely confused. "No, he definitely had a will. Pretty clear, too. I didn't draft it, but I processed the filing. I can't share details without conflict of interest, but that's odd. Maybe you should look into it." I don't remember the rest of the conversation. I think I made some excuse and left. That night, I barely slept. My thoughts wouldn't shut up. I kept hearing her voice in my head. "He left a direct bequest. Specifically to you." So many emotions swirled. Confusion, anger, sadness, but mostly this strange, gnawing disbelief. I told myself there had to be a mistake. Maybe she was remembering wrong. Maybe it was a different grandson. But the more I sat with it, the more things didn't add up. Pops wasn't the kind of man to leave things messy. And he loved that shop. He would have wanted it to stay in the family. Or at least, go to someone who gave a damn. And if he had left something to me, why would my parents lie? The next few weeks were a blur of quiet obsession. I requested public probate records, filed forms, paid fees, hit dead ends. Some of the older records had been sealed at the family's request, citing privacy. Others had been filed under different names, which I later learned were associated with my dad's company. Piece by piece, a picture began forming, and what I found made my blood run cold. There was a will. Pops had named me, by full name, no ambiguity, as the recipient of his share of the auto shop, the inventory, the land, even some accounts. And somehow, between the time of his death and the probate closure, the shop's assets had been transferred. Not to me, not to a trust, to my parents. I didn't know what to do with that. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, the documents spread out in front of me, scanned copies of property filings and asset transfers, and signed declarations that bore names I trusted my whole life. There was no typo, no clerical mistake. They'd taken it, and never told me. I think what shocked me most at first wasn't just the fact that they lied, but how easy it seemed to be for them. How seamless. They never stumbled over their words, never hesitated, never looked guilty. They had just erased the truth like it never happened. I sat in my car outside my apartment for nearly an hour that night, gripping the steering wheel with both hands like it might anchor me. The streetlights buzzed faintly above. My phone sat silent in the passenger seat, and for a moment, I actually thought about calling my dad. Just calling him, asking outright. But I didn't, because something inside me, something that had never fully doubted my parents before, whispered, "Don't give them the warning." That voice didn't sound like mine. It was calmer, older, sharper. Maybe it was Pop's, in a way. Or maybe it was just the part of me I'd always kept too quiet. So instead, I started digging deeper. Over the next couple weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. I combed through everything. Every local registry, every business filing, every tax record I could access. I found LLC transfers, signed declarations, account consolidations, all dated within 4 months after Pops died. Most of the paperwork was clean, clinical, really. Legalese that felt like it belonged in a courtroom, not in a betrayal. But what chilled me was how methodical it all was. They had a plan. Pops passed in February. By May, the shop's assets had been absorbed under a new business entity owned by my dad. The land was transferred to a family trust, which listed my mom and dad as sole trustees. Nothing in my name, not even a footnote. There was one document, though, a scanned will, witnessed and notarized, that I stared at for hours. In it, Pops wrote, "To my grandson, first last name, who showed me the value of patience and integrity. I leave my share in the business I built with my hands, in hopes it teaches him what it taught me. That quiet work leaves the deepest roots." That one line broke me. I sat on the floor with the lights off, the only glow coming from my laptop screen, and I cried harder than I had at the funeral. Not just from grief, though that was there too, but from something deeper. He saw me, and they buried that. They buried him. I started seeing my childhood in reverse. Like someone hit rewind on my memories, and now every smile looked a little too stiff. Every, "we're just doing what's best," sounded more like, "we're doing what's best for us." I remembered that week after the funeral, how fast everything moved. The house was cleaned out before the flowers even wilted. The shop's windows were papered over. I was told there wasn't much worth saving. God, the audacity. They looked me in the eyes and told me there was nothing left, while they signed documents in ink still wet from his death. And the worst part? I didn't question it. I trusted them. I let them hold my grief in their hands, and they used it to smother the truth. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I couldn't. I wasn't ready. It felt like approaching a cliff blindfolded. I didn't know how far I'd fall, only that there was no going back. Instead, I tested the waters. Over Sunday dinner, I asked my dad, "Do you ever think about reopening the shop?" He looked up from his plate. "What shop?" "Pop's shop." He paused. That place was falling apart when he died. No point reviving it. My mom chimed in, like she'd rehearsed it. "He was sentimental, but it wasn't sustainable, sweetheart. You wouldn't have wanted the burden." I nodded, chewed my food, swallowed my disgust. They were still lying. And now that I knew, I could see it. The deflections, the dismissiveness, the way they subtly rewrote history in casual conversation, always framing themselves as the responsible ones, the practical ones, the heroes. It was like watching people narrate a movie you'd seen 100 times, only now you realized they'd spliced out half the scenes. Around that time, I started dreaming about Pops again. Not vivid dreams, just flickers, moments. I'd find myself back in the shop, alone, dust dancing in the light. or sitting in the passenger seat of his pickup while he hummed along to the radio. In one dream, he handed me a wrench, but when I took it, it crumbled into ash. I woke up shaking. Was that grief still? Or was it guilt? Guilt for being so naive, for not seeing what they were capable of, for letting his memory get rewritten by people who cared more about square footage and account balances than the man himself. I went back to the old shop one weekend. It's a vape store now. The original signage is gone. The big windows, the ones I used to help clean with newspaper and Windex, are covered with neon lights and promotional posters. 50% OFF, all juice, blinks in seizure-inducing colors. I didn't go inside. I just stood on the sidewalk, hands in my pockets, and stared at the building like it might recognize me. I thought maybe I'd feel something, some sense of closure or connection. But all I felt was hollow, like standing in a body without a soul, like grief with nowhere left to land. I found out later that my parents sold the land 2 years ago for a huge markup. The area had been rezoned, values spiked, and they cashed out quietly. Probably used it to pay off their mortgage. Maybe that's how they remodeled the kitchen. I remember Mom bragging about the new countertops. It all clicked. The sudden vacation to Maui, the newer car, the smug little comments about things working out. They didn't just steal an inheritance. They stole a piece of my history, my connection to the only person in that family who made me feel seen. And the world kept spinning. They kept smiling, kept playing the role of humble, hardworking parents who never got a handout. I started writing everything down, not just the documents, but the story, the way they'd gaslight me, the lies, the omissions, the way they'd looked at me over meatloaf and casually edited reality. It became almost ritualistic. Every night, after work, I'd sit at my desk and write. Memory by memory, lie by lie. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but it helped me stay sane. Helped me remember who I was before the silence swallowed everything. The thing about betrayal, the real, family kind, is that it's not just about money. It's about the casualness of it. The way people can decide, quietly, that you don't matter. That your love, your trust, your place in the story can be edited out like a typo. And when you find out, you don't get justice. You don't get a refund. You just get clarity. A raw, bitter clarity that doesn't leave you. Not ever. I've replayed the moment I found out 100 times. Maybe 1,000. I keep wondering, did they rehearse it? That day they sat me down, days after Pops died, and told me there was nothing left. Did they look at each other in the hallway first and make sure the story matched? Did they sit at the kitchen table the night before, sipping wine and going over the paperwork, making sure the dates lined up, that there were no loose ends? Or was it easier than that? Maybe they didn't even think twice. Maybe, to them, it was just obvious. Of course they would keep the business. Of course they deserved it more than I did. I wasn't entitled, right? I was just the quiet kid, the easy son, the one who never made demands, never pushed, never questioned. I was easy to lie to. I started writing this post weeks ago. Not here, not on Reddit, just on my laptop, a Word doc called Truth. Docs. It wasn't for anyone at first. It was just for me. I listed it all. Pop's will, naming me directly. The property transfer dates. The LLC registration documents under my dad's name. The account consolidations that siphoned every piece of value into their trust. The resale records from when they flipped the land for a 6-figure profit. Every bit of it was verifiable. Every bit of it had my name missing where it should have been. Then I started adding the conversations. The word-for-word lies they told me. The blank stares. The fake sympathy. The things they didn't say when silence was just as loud. I didn't know what I was building. A case? A confession? A eulogy? All I knew was I couldn't carry this alone anymore. What really broke something in me, though, was a conversation I had with my aunt, my dad's sister. She lives out of state, doesn't visit much, but we talk occasionally, and I called her under the pretense of catching up. Halfway through, I asked if she remembered anything about Pop's estate. She went quiet for a second, then said, "Well, he told me he left something for you." My throat went dry. "He did?" "Yeah," she said softly. "He was proud of you. Told me the business would skip a generation. Thought you'd do something smart with it." I didn't say anything. She asked, "Didn't he?" I changed the subject. I couldn't bring myself to say it. Not yet. Not to her. But it confirmed everything. Pops didn't just intend to leave it to me. He talked about it. Openly. With people outside the immediate family. They knew. They all knew what he wanted. And still, my parents took it. I started fantasizing about confrontation. Not dramatic screaming matches or courtroom showdowns. That's not who I am. I'm not built for theatrical explosions. But I imagined sitting them down. Calm. Cold. Showing them the documents, one by one. Watching their faces crack. I rehearsed the speech in my head. You knew he left it to me. You sold it anyway. You buried the truth. But every version ended the same. Them deflecting, minimizing, spinning it. We did what was best. You weren't ready. It's just business. Don't make this ugly. Because that's the thing about people who rewrite the truth. They're fluent in self-preservation. They've been editing reality for years. They don't feel shame. They feel justified. I sat on this knowledge for months. Went to work. Smiled at coworkers. Paid bills. Sent my mom happy birthday texts. Pretended everything was normal. But inside, I was watching a clock tick toward something. I didn't know what. I just knew I couldn't unknow the truth. And pretending otherwise was starting to rot me from the inside. Grief is heavy. But betrayal, real, bone-deep betrayal by the people who raised you, is a weight that keeps changing shape. Sometimes sharp, sometimes suffocating. Sometimes it just sits in your chest like wet cement. It's a strange thing, realizing your parents are people. Flawed, small, capable of things you never imagined. I always knew they weren't saints. My dad could be cold, controlling. My mom had this emotional evasiveness, like she only ever knew how to deflect, never to feel. But I thought they loved me. I thought that love would act as a kind of floor, something they wouldn't drop me through. But they did. And now I was in free fall, trying to find the bottom. I started preparing. Not for a legal battle. It was too late for that. The assets were gone. The will executed. The statute of limitations long expired. I consulted with a friend who practices estate law, and his verdict was grim. Even if you had the original will, there's no clean case. Everything's tied up. You'd be fighting shadows. So no, I wasn't getting the money back. But that wasn't what I wanted anymore. I wanted the truth. I wanted to take it back. Not the property. Not the account balances. Just the reality. The one they tried to bury and pave over with granite countertops and vacation slideshows. So I planned something quiet. Something deliberate. Not revenge in the dramatic, scorched earth sense. Just a reclamation. A public one. It started with gathering every piece of proof I had. Scanned PDFs, screenshots, emails, statements from Pop's old friends, some of whom were still alive and remembered what he'd said about me taking over someday. I compiled everything into a digital file. Then I wrote the story. Not for Reddit. Not yet. Not for a lawyer. Not for friends. I wrote it like a letter. To Pops. I told him what happened. Line by line. I told him about the lie. The silence. The theft. I told him about the dreams. About standing outside the shop that no longer belonged to either of us. And then I told him, I'm going to set the record straight. The anniversary of his death was coming up. 8 years. 8 years since they stood at his funeral and said, we'll take care of everything. 8 years since they quietly stripped me out of the will he left. 8 years of pretending it didn't happen. I circled the date on my calendar. August 14th. That's when it would happen. It was fitting, somehow, that it rained on the morning of August 14th. Not a storm, not dramatic. Just a gray, steady drizzle. The kind that makes everything quieter, like the world itself is holding its breath. 8 years to the day. 8 years since I stood by Pop's casket and trusted the people beside me. 8 years since they put their hands on my shoulder and told me. He didn't leave much. I used to believe that. Now I knew better. And today, everyone else would too. I didn't sleep the night before. Not from nerves. I was past nerves. Past grief, even. What I felt was something colder, focused, controlled. Like every part of me had locked into place. I went over everything one last time. The documents, scanned copies of the will, property transfers, business registrations, emails, notarized forms. The photos, Pops in front of the shop, Pops with me in the office, me as a teenager holding up a helping hand of the month plaque he'd made as a joke. The statements, brief quotes from 2 of his old employees, both retired, both confirming what Pops had told them, that I was his choice to take over. And finally, my letter, the one I'd written to Pops. I edited it into something cleaner, more narrative. Still honest. Still raw. Still mine. The plan was simple. At noon, I scheduled a post to go live, on Facebook, of all places. The Family Hub. where birthdays and graduation photos and vacation albums lived. I created a fresh post, uploaded the files into a Google Drive link with view-only access, and added this caption. Today marks 8 years since we buried my grandfather, Arthur, last name. What most of you don't know is that on that day, my parents looked me in the eyes and told me he left nothing behind. That wasn't true. He left a will. He left his business. He left me something. And they took it. Here's the truth. I'm done staying quiet. I attached a cropped photo of Pops and me at the shop, back when I was maybe 14. I remember that day. He had just taught me how to do inventory on paper, and I felt like I was being initiated into something sacred. That photo meant something. It still did. I scheduled the post for 12 p.m. Then I closed the laptop. The hours before noon passed in slow motion. I didn't go to work. Took a personal day. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not friends, not coworkers. I wanted it to land like thunder, unexpected and undeniable. I cleaned my apartment. Showered. Ate toast I couldn't taste. Paced the floor. I thought I might throw up. Not from fear, from the pressure of finally doing something. After 8 years of silence, this was the moment I stepped out of the role they'd written for me. The quiet one. The respectful son. The background character in their story. No more. At 11:59, I opened Facebook. Watched the clock tick over. 12 o'clock. Click. It was live. The reactions started slowly. First, a handful of likes. Probably just people seeing the photo without reading the caption. Then came the comments. Wait, what? I remember that shop. Your granddad was amazing. Are you serious? He left you the business? Then the messages. Texts. DMs. Emails. Most from extended family. Cousins. One of my uncles. A few family friends. And then, my mom called. I didn't pick up. She called again, immediately. Then my dad. Still didn't answer. I sat at the kitchen table, hands flat, staring at my phone as it buzzed like it was possessed. Then the text came. Mom, what is this? Please call me. Dad, you're misunderstanding what happened. This is damaging to the family. Mom, again. We need to talk. This isn't the way to handle it. I didn't respond. Because here's the thing. They had 8 years to talk. They had 8 years to tell me the truth. To include me. To honor his wishes. They chose silence. Now they could sit in it. I refreshed the post an hour later. Over 100 comments. Dozens of shares. The Drive link had over 600 views. People were reading it. People were seeing what they did. There was no anger in my post. No name calling. No embellishment. Just proof, and pain, and a request. If you knew him, if you loved him, you deserve to know the truth too. That part hit harder than I expected. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Pops. About his legacy. His name, his wishes, his story. They tried to erase it. I brought it back. Around 3 p.m., my cousin Jenny texted me. Hey, I always thought it was weird how fast they sold the place. I'm sorry, man. Pops would be proud of you for this. Then another cousin. Then a friend of Pops. Messages of support. Of shock. Of recognition. That last one meant more than anything. Because for so long, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. The bond between us. The unspoken inheritance of not just money or business, but trust. But I hadn't imagined it. Other people saw it too. He did love me like a son. He didn't want me to have that place. And they stole it. At 5 p.m., I finally opened the family group chat. It was chaos. My parents hadn't said much there. Just a few vague, let's not do this in public messages. But my aunt, the one I'd called weeks earlier, she'd seen the post. And she wasn't silent. I remember him telling me he left it to my name. I asked you about it at the time, and you said he changed his mind. So you lied. Another uncle chimed in. Then my dad finally wrote. There were complicated circumstances. You don't know everything. To which I responded, finally, the first and only thing I'd said to them directly that day. No, I know enough. And now, so does everyone else. They haven't called since. Not after that message. The group chat went dead. The calls stopped. I imagine they're regrouping, circling the wagons, spinning a new version. Let them. I don't care. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. And now it's out there. Undeniable. Permanent. That night, I walked to the edge of town, to the industrial strip where the old shop used to be. It was closed, of course. Vape lights off. Rain still falling. I stood under the awning where Pops used to smoke his pipe and watch the street. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. Not because justice had been served, but because the silence was broken. He was seen again. And so was I. The morning after the post, I woke up feeling like I'd been in a car crash. Not physically, just that hollow, aching fatigue that settles in your bones when you finally stop holding something in. I laid in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the buzz of my phone vibrating every few minutes with new notifications. People were still reacting. Some supportive, some confused, some cautiously reaching out to say, I had no idea. The flood had begun, and it wasn't going to stop just because I'd clicked post. I checked the group chat first. Still silent. Not a single word since I dropped that final message. My mom and dad had both read it. The little scene indicators glared at me, but neither of them replied. No apology, no explanation, just absence. The kind of silence that feels intentional. The kind of silence that says, you embarrassed us, and we'll never forgive you for it. Which is funny, really, because they're the ones who did it. All I did was lift the curtain. Around noon, I got an email from a name I didn't recognize. Subject line, about Arthur's will. It was from one of the attorneys at the firm that handled Pop's estate, a junior associate at the time. He told me he had seen my post. I guess someone shared it around. And though he couldn't officially comment due to confidentiality, he wanted to say, for what it's worth, your grandfather's original wishes were very clear. And I remember thinking, at the time, how rare it was for someone to bypass the immediate children and go straight to a grandchild. He trusted you. That much was obvious. I don't know what made me cry more, the validation, or the fact that even someone outside the family saw what they had tried to erase. That weekend, I didn't go anywhere. I turned my phone off for a whole day, let the world spin without me. I needed the quiet, but more than that, I needed to feel again. Not just react. Not just survive. I pulled out the old box Pops left me. The one my parents gave me after the funeral, like it was some consolation prize. I hadn't touched it in years. Inside, his flannel shirt, still folded. His wrench set. A Polaroid of us from when I was maybe 10, greasy-fingered and grinning. And his pocket knife, the one he always carried, the blade worn smooth with age. I held it in my hand and thought. He thought I was worthy. They didn't. The next family member to call me was my cousin Melanie. She sounded tentative, like she didn't know which version of me she was going to get. I just wanted to say, she said, I read everything. And I believe you. Honestly, it made me look at a lot of things differently. She told me how, after Pops died, she always thought it was weird how fast things moved. How my parents suddenly seemed to step up and take over everything. Then became cagey any time someone asked about the shop. They made it sound like there was nothing to talk about, she said. But looking back, yeah, it felt off. We talked for almost an hour. It was the first real conversation I'd had with anyone in the family. Real in the sense that it wasn't paper thin, wasn't curated for comfort. She didn't try to minimize it. She didn't suggest I should have handled it privately. She just listened. I didn't realize how much I needed that. The fallout grew, quietly but steadily. Some relatives picked sides. A few unfriended me outright. My parents, I found out later, told some family members that I had misunderstood the paperwork, that I was confused and emotional. Classic tactics. I didn't respond. I didn't fight. Let them spin. Their version of the story was a house built on sand. Mine had documents, dates, quotes, names, scans, and more than that, mine had Pops. I didn't need them to believe me anymore. I needed to believe myself. What surprised me most in the days that followed was what I didn't feel. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt empty, like I'd finally removed a splinter that had been under my skin for years, but now I was bleeding. It turns out the truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just burns the bridge behind you, leaving you stranded on the other side, wondering what kind of person you'll have to become now. Because the person I used to be, the son who trusted them, he's gone. And I don't think he's coming back. I did get one message from my mother for days after the post went live. Just a few lines. We don't understand why you're doing this. We always did what we thought was best. You're turning people against us. This isn't fair. Not once did she say sorry. Not once did she mention him, the man whose will they rewrote. Not once did she ask what I needed. I stared at the message for a long time, and then, finally, I replied, you did what was best for yourselves. I'm just finally doing the same. Then I blocked her. There's a weird freedom that comes after the storm, when everything's scorched and quiet. You stop checking your phone every 5 minutes. You stop waiting for some magical reckoning. You accept that most people will never apologize, never own what they did. You accept that some damage is permanent. And still, life goes on. I went back to work, started sleeping better, even signed up for a night class I'd been thinking about for years, something in business management, oddly enough. A quiet way of honoring the man who once trusted me with a set of keys and a ledger. I didn't get the inheritance, but I got clarity. And maybe, someday, that'll be worth even more. I still visit the spot where the shop used to be. Not every week, just when I need to remember. There's nothing left of him there, really. No sign with his name. No photos on the walls. But I walk past it slowly, like I'm visiting a grave. And in my mind, I picture him still sitting behind the counter in that worn flannel shirt, sipping root beer, watching me. And maybe, just maybe, he's proud of what I finally did. Even if it took 8 years. Even if I did it alone. It's a strange thing, waking up one day and realizing your story doesn't belong to your family anymore. For so long, everything I was felt tied to them. Not just the obvious stuff, name, childhood memories, birthdays, but the subtler pieces, the unspoken loyalty, the assumption that we're on the same side. And then one day you see it clearly. You were never on the same side. They were protecting something, not you, but their version of the truth. Their comfort, their status. And when those things clashed with your place in the story, they cut you out instead. I used to think that if I was quiet enough, respectful enough, I'd earn my place back. That they'd eventually explain themselves. Maybe even apologize. But they didn't. And now, I don't want them to. It's been 3 months since August 14th. The social media storm has died down. The messages have slowed. The family group chat is a ghost town. No new birthday posts. No invites. Just digital dust. I don't miss it. What I do miss is something harder to name. Not the people, but the idea of family. The warmth I imagined was there. The safety I thought existed, just because we shared blood. It's like grieving something that never really existed, but still shaped you. You don't just feel sad. You feel used. I've started building something new now. Not in some dramatic, I'm gonna launch a business to honor Pops kind of way. Nothing that flashy. But slowly. Intentionally. Like how I signed up for that business course. I'm a few weeks in, and it feels grounding. I'm not trying to recreate the shop. That time is gone. But I am learning how to take ownership of something. To understand it the way Pops understood his work. With care. I've been reading his old notes too. Tucked into that box were a couple yellowing notebooks, ledgers mixed with stray thoughts, quotes scribbled in margins. One stuck with me. People think legacy is about money. But it's not. Legacy is how you make someone feel when they remember you. That one hit me square in the chest. Because when I think of my parents now, there's no warmth. Just betrayal. But when I think of Pops, I feel seen. I feel chosen. I feel known. That's legacy. And they couldn't steal that, no matter what they took. Last week, I took a trip out of town. Just a weekend thing. Nothing fancy, just a rented cabin near a lake. No signal, no noise. I brought the box with me. Set it on the little table by the window. Laid out his flannel shirt across the back of the chair like he was sitting there with me. It sounds stupid, I know, but it helped. I sat by the fire and read one of the notebooks cover to cover. One passage near the back. Don't wait for people to tell you who you are. Tell them. And if they won't listen, show them. I don't know why he never said that out loud to me. Maybe he didn't need to. Maybe he knew I'd find it when I was ready. I've also started writing again. Not just this story, though getting this all down has been its own kind of therapy, but more. Short essays. Memories. Reflections. I've got this private blog now, hidden behind a password, where I just spill. Sometimes it's about Pops. Sometimes it's about me trying to figure out who I am without the weight of the good son role hanging around my neck. Sometimes it's just anger. But every post feels like a brick laid down on a new path. One that I chose. And for once, I don't feel like a side character in someone else's version of my life. I wish I could say I feel healed. I don't. There are still days I wake up and think, maybe I overreacted. Maybe I should have just talked to them again. And then I remember their silence. I remember that letter from my mom, cold, blame-shifting, empty. I remember the years they let me grieve the loss of something they were profiting from. And I remember what it felt like to see my name in that will, to know that Pops trusted me. And they didn't even tell me. No, I didn't overreact. I underreacted for years. August 14th wasn't a breakdown. It wasn't a tantrum. It was the bare minimum truth finally spoken aloud. People have asked me if I'll ever reconcile with my parents. What they usually mean is, will I sweep it under the rug? The answer is no. Not because I hate them. Oddly, I don't. I've stopped expecting anything from them. And with that comes a kind of emotional distance that doesn't leave much room for hatred. But I'll never pretend again. Never shrink myself to make them comfortable. Never let them rewrite a history they stole and call it family. They burned that bridge. I just lit a match so the rest of the world could see it. A couple weeks ago, I got an unexpected letter. Not an email. A real letter. Handwritten, in shaky pen. It was from Pop's oldest friend, a guy named Stan who used to run the tire shop next door. He'd read the Facebook post, apparently, and someone gave him my address. Inside the envelope was a short note. Your grandfather talked about you more than anyone else in the family. He was proud of your quiet strength. He said you had something your dad never did. Patience and principle. Just thought you should know. There was nothing else in the envelope. But I sat on the floor of my apartment, holding that paper, and I cried like I hadn't cried since this all began. Because even now, years after the man is gone, he's still showing up for me in ways my parents never have. I think, in the end, that's what this whole story is about. Not money, not property, not revenge, but memory, and the fight for whose version gets to survive. They tried to bury his truth, my truth, but I dug it up, dusted it off, held it to the light, and now, it's mine again, not because I won, but because I refused to forget. I don't know when I stopped expecting closure from them. Maybe it was after the fourth ignored message. Maybe it was after my cousin told me my dad was deeply hurt, but didn't know how to say it. Or maybe it was the moment I realized I didn't need it. Closure is a lie, sometimes. We think it means everything gets wrapped up neatly, that apologies are made, that people confess, that hearts soften. But the truth is, some endings don't come with explanations. Just a door closing quietly, permanently, and you don't have to wait on the other side forever. I saw my dad once, a few weeks ago. Pure accident. I was leaving a bookstore downtown, one I go to often, quiet and tucked between two crumbling old buildings. He was walking on the other side of the street with someone I didn't recognize. Probably a client. Maybe a friend. He didn't see me, but I saw him. Same walk. Same expression he always wore when he was focused. Eyes forward, jaw tight, like he was constantly chewing through problems in his head. I waited until he passed. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't feel like I owed him anything. Not a conversation, not a confrontation, not a glance. Let him live in his version of the story. I've got mine now. The funny thing is, I used to worry I'd feel guilty. That telling the truth publicly, that speaking his truth, would make me the bad guy. That maybe I'd gone too far. But guilt only grows in silence. And when you name the truth out loud, you take away its power to rot you from the inside. I've been sleeping better, laughing more. I say no more easily now. To invitations, to emotional labor, to people who only reach out when they want something, not when they want you. I've got boundaries now. They came late, but they came strong. Pops has been gone 8 years. It feels longer, but also, like I only just started mourning him for real. The grief before was tangled up, diluted by confusion and lies and the gut-sick feeling that something had been stolen, even if I couldn't name what. But now I grieve the man as he was. Not the version my parents filtered through spreadsheets and sales, but the man who smelled like grease and peppermint gum, who gave me my first real responsibility, who told me, without needing to say it out loud, I trust you. That grief is quieter, but deeper, and I let it come. I let it stay, because it's mine. I went to his grave last week. I don't go often. I'm not one for rituals, but this time it felt important. Like the final page of a book I'd been writing for years. I brought one thing, the pocket knife from the box. The blade was still smooth, the handle worn to the shape of his palm. I laid it down at the base of the headstone. Not because I wanted to leave something behind, but because I wanted to return something. Something they tried to take from me. Something that was never theirs to claim. His memory. His faith in me. His legacy. I sat there for a while. Didn't say much. Just thought. About how he built that shop with his hands. About how he trusted people who didn't deserve it. About how I was becoming a man I think he'd be proud of. Not because I made noise, but because I stood up when it counted. And finally, I whispered, they tried to forget you. I didn't. Then I left the knife behind. Not as a symbol, but as a promise. So here's the truth, if you followed this far. Sometimes, justice doesn't come in courtrooms. Sometimes, the apology never arrives. Sometimes, the people who wronged you get to keep living as if they didn't. But truth? Truth stays. It lives in memory, in documents, in the stories we refuse to bury. And when you speak it, calmly, clearly, unapologetically, you reclaim something more valuable than inheritance. You reclaim yourself. I don't know if I'll ever talk to my parents again. I don't feel the need to. They wrote me out of their version of our family history. So I wrote my own. And it's quieter, yes. Smaller. But it's true. And it doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. Let the dead rest. Let the liars fester in silence. And let the truth stand. Even if you're the only one still holding it.